Okay, so here we are back in that lovely scene we set up last time. And if you're new to this, this is simply a pig head that we started with, turned it into a volume, applied some turbulence and dissipation and things of that nature, and we ended up with this sweet looking simulation here. Now, I'm going to just go ahead right off the bat. I'm just going to throw the whole simulation out. The reason why I wanted to start from this scene at all is because of the lights and the caching mechanisms and stuff like that. But otherwise, we're more or less going to start from scratch. In fact, I'm just going to save it now. Boom. Okay, so what's going to make this lesson particularly different is right off the bat the source. We can start from the pig head. I'm actually just going to start from a sphere. And this sphere is going to add into the sim as opposed to the sim starting from. Our output is still visible here. It's going to add into the simulation over time rather than it starting there as just the head. So here's a sphere. We're going to have the sphere move. It's going to grow and contract. So I'm going to just give it some resolution here. I guess what I'm picturing is maybe we throw down a mountain sop, and the mountain is this thing that adds basically a displacement. That's a pretty decent displacement actually already. For the sake of argument, there we go. And let's actually have it like animate. It's not too important how it animates, but something like that. I'm just going to give it, say, we'll offset the noise of it with time. So something like that. In fact, maybe even something a little faster. The $T, of course, is the time variable. So it's basically moving the y of the offset of the noise up in space. So that's cool. And also, before that, I'm going to give it a, you know what, actually, I'm going to put it after it. I'm going to have it do the noise first, and then this will make it grow and contract. I'm going to say, I'm just going to animate it myself. So I just gave it a keyframe. Maybe here it gets big. Key it again. Maybe here it gets much smaller. Maybe it's big again. I don't know. Something like that. So now it's being crazy. So you can hand animate it like that. Actually, another cool way to do it kind of dynamically is there's a fun little expression called noise, and again we can feed t into it. It actually takes an x, y, and z. I'm just going to use it as a one-dimensional thing. And if we scope it, and we can actually see what that graph looks like. So you can see it's going from negative, let's say approximately negative 0.5 to 0.5. Well, not approximately, that's actually quite literally what it's doing. And you'll see that if we scrub along, it's getting bigger and smaller. Now, of course, negative isn't going to do us much good here. So we know it goes to negative 0.5 at the minimum. So I'm just going to add 1.0. So it goes from about 0.5 to 1.5. So let's scope it again. And you can see it's going from about 0.5 to 1.5. And that'll be cool. So now it's kind of just getting bigger and smaller on its own merits there. And if we want time to pass faster flowing through that, we'll actually say, hey, how about we multiply the time times 1.5? So now it's going to do that faster. And that's kind of the nice thing about Houdini is that we get to scope this, much like a graphic calculator, and what could be cooler than that? You can even, I'm doing the ladder on the actual multiplier here, and you can see how it's compressing it as I'm basically speeding up the passage of time through that noise expression. So let's have we play it. Oh yeah, there we go. So that'll be nice and volatile for us, and that'll be pretty cool. Let's see, where is our camera? Our camera's around here. We might even need to move this back a little bit. Cool. Great. So there you have it. That will be our source over the course of the simulation. Now, with this movement, we want to impart this movement into the simulation itself. So I'm going to suggest a trail sop. A trail sop is one of many Houdini sops where it actually does a whole bunch of stuff. Typically, it's used to it leaves a trail behind of you can kind of see it happening in there, of of the animation, so it's kind of got this psychedelic look to it. We don't even want to do that. What we want to do in this case is actually compute velocity. It's one of these little hidden things. This button here with the particle on the end of the little streamer is the velocity or the velocity trails. And basically, I don't know if you can see it, if we get closer, it's showing the velocity. So you can see as it moves in towards the center, we see the green line sticking out this way. And then as it comes back out, you can see they're sticking in. So they're not actually pointing the direction that's going in. They're actually pointing the opposite direction. It's meant to be like a trail. So the more importantly, we now have a velocity vector, v3fv, which remember means it's a vector, which means it's 3 floats, and it's of type v, which means that they'll be stored as a x, y, and z when you look at them in the geometry spreadsheet, like that, vx, vy, vz. And as we animate this, there they are. Those are our cool velocity things going around like that. And we're actually going to be able to leverage that now in the fluid source. Fluid source is a convenient utility that packages up a whole bunch of other little things that you could do. Actually pretty useful to look through this when you have the time. They do some cool stuff in here, especially in terms of visualizing things. But for now, we'll just attach it like that. So what this is going to do is going to make density volumes, and it's going to make velocity volumes, and it's going to make anything else that you need it to do. So right here, we can see both immediately. It's visualizing with those rainbow lines, kind of like in the last lesson. It's showing you a vector field. Now it's only showing us one slice, or else it would be too chaotic to see everything. But it's gaining the data from the points, and of course this being a mesh, the points only exist on the surface, on the very top, so that, you know, it's hollow on the inside, which is kind of what you see. This looks like a ring kind of vectors, but that will be good enough for what we need. The density also is showing up right along the surface, which will be good for what we want. If you didn't want that, there's all kinds of parameters here on the fluid source. I'm actually going to make it a little wider so we can see it easier for now. You can, under here, the SDF from geometry, that's what is happening here. So minimum distance, if we turn that off and we turn off empty interior, now it's a solid volume. We can see that better now. The density that it's adding in is much more solid, as opposed to just the minimum distance from the surface is what this is saying. You can move this around. You can see how it's adding it. It's going out from the surface by changing this. The feather length is nice, where it'll kind of ramp off from the surface. You know what? Let's actually let's make it solid instead. That'll be cool. We're not going to get into much other ones, but this noise one is very, very important. This is very key to making your simulations look interesting. If you just source a blob in, you're going to get a blob out. So why don't we break it up with some of their default noise stuff? I'm going to say we'll make it more grainy. We'll make the amplitude. Again, this is just a noise. It's a 3D noise. You can see it's adding, because we have it set to additive. I'm going to change to multiply. The noise is going to be some 3D values from 0 to 1, using probably a turbulent noise field. It's animated by default. Even if these weren't animated, in fact, I'll just turn these off for a second so you can see the noise is animated, like so. You can change things like how fast it animates. That's the pulse duration. Putting it to 2 means it'll go twice as slow. I like to keep it, I think we're going to keep it a little fast, because again, we're going to kind of go for something a little more intense here. Element size, you can see the noise getting bigger and smaller. It's like we're zooming in on it. If we want big elements, it'll be a chunkier kind of thing, like so. And then now, as we move through it, you got big old chunks there. Increasing the grain will change stuff up. In fact, this is a pretty low res thing, I'm guessing already. Yeah, see, it's only 25 voxels on a side. So how about we let's change the density or the actual cell size, the division size. So if we make it half as large, we're going to have twice as many voxels along each side. See, now it's 50, 50, 50. 50, 50, 50 is still pretty small, but it's not a huge area anyway on the screen, so we could probably get away with that. In fact, let's just do that for now. We can always come back here, you know, Houdini being procedural, and change that later. And it's already starting to crawl a little bit on my box. So we've got lots of different things, lots of different interesting things modulating what we're doing here. Remember, we have this animating mountain. We've got this animating size here. Both of those things are going to contribute to the velocity. And then that velocity is being sampled into a velocity volume. We can see that by middle clicking on this guy. Vel X, Vel Y, and Vel Z. So it's actually 3 different volumes. Each one is throwing scalar values, and the scalar values are just velocity X, velocity Y, velocity Z. As far as you're concerned, we have a vector being stored at every position that there's density being stored, more or less. So we have our density fields, velocity fields, and that's good enough for now. We can see also in the under velocity volumes here, things like visualizing. That's how we're actually seeing it. This isn't turning off whether it's making the velocity or not. This is just merely turning on and off if you see the velocity. The velocity has lots of cool stuff you can change. This is how far it looks to get those velocities. Remember, it's sampling the points from the incoming geometry. So this is basically saying every voxel should look this far away. And if you still can't find something that far away, well, then you get nothing. That's why there's so many empty ones. But otherwise, you can, the higher you make this, the slower it'll get to sample. But you know, it's more purely your intent. I just don't want to have a huge velocity field going too far out yet. Curl noise is pretty sweet. Curl noise basically adds a noise everywhere, regardless of, you know, it's not sampling the points from the geometry anymore. Now it's just everything has a crazy noise going on. And what it's doing is it's adding it to the existing noise. So if we turn it off, you can see here were that ring of velocities. When I do this, you can still kind of see it. They're just being perturbed somewhat by that velocity there. Now there's no density out there yet anyway. So I think we're doing fine. But it's the same kind of parameters as the noise on the density. So if we do like swirl size, oopsies, got away from me there. The bigger we make it, again, the bigger we make it, the bigger you'll see the details get. So now it's a very like more generalized noise as opposed to the much more hyperactive and smaller one when we were all the way down here at the default of 1. Scale 2, they'll just make it twice as strong. You can see how super red it's getting right now. The red is technically arbitrary. You can control that here under the visualization, but suffice to say, I don't want to overwhelm the velocities we were initially getting. Like, I do want these to be taken into account. That was the whole point of making it grow and contract. So anyway, add it, perturb it, but not that much. This seems nice to me, so that's fine. Great. So there you have it. So into the simulation, we're going to source this density every frame and this velocity. It's going to add in there as well. Remember, it's good practice to add a null dude here on the end. We'll just call this the source. And then now if we ever need to change anything upstream from this, you know, we're just going to have our simulation point right to this. Looking good. Actually, before we even go, this is something where you could even play blast this, much like play blasting a simulation. We can just see what a sense of your simulation will be your simulation, but just seeing how fast the velocity is changing, seeing how fast the source density is changing. Now we can play it. Pretty hyperactive here. So we may find later that maybe this is too crazy. I say we go with it for now, though. So escape that, and good. So now on to adding into the simulation.